talking about advice, and got a little bit of it from the ancient world, a little bit of it from my own life, and it's all tied together through those scriptural foundations to make it meaningful and true. So we got some interesting things to talk about. We'll start off with what Proverbs 15:22 says. Without consultation and wise advice, plans are frustrated, but with many counselors, they are established and succeed. So it's like I was talking about a few minutes ago, we're all products of our environment to some degree. I mean, specifically our listening environment, what we hear, because those we give our ear to are those that we allow to shape us. That's why, when you're young, you may have heard people say, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And because they know who you're giving your ear to and who you're listening to. And, how many times have you said yourself, I'm glad I listened to what my mom said, or I'm glad I'm listening to what my brother told me to, or I'm glad I didn't listen to my science teacher, that's probably not a good example of some, but it's always related about some kind of advice. So you like it or not, many of the decisions we make are formulated by the advice of others that we just put in our head somewhere and chucked away until we had to reference it later for some reason, because the people we give our ear to determine whether or not some of those decisions are going to be fruitful or disastrous. And that's why we have to be careful. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good character. Now, obviously, it's not talking about just being in the presence of a person. It's talking about the advice. And sometimes advice comes through actions, watching someone and go, that's a good idea. Influence. That's advice. Whether we know it or not, it's an advice in action, which is why I got into the business of people giving me their ear to tell them about Jesus, not just to shape people, but to save them. Now, as far as if you want to call it advice of the truth of the Bible, there's two classes of people in this world. That's it. Everything you can boil down to two classes of people. There's the group who says God speaks truth and we observe it, and then there's the group who says the opposite. We decide what truth is, and God will deal with it. And that group of people is not going to get anywhere into eternity. The group of people who understands that God speaks truth and we observe it. That's where you get wise counsel from. That's the only place wise counsel comes from. And you can tell when you get good advice, because it's sometimes good advice. The results that it yields takes time. It takes patience. It's cultivated. Whereas bad advice, I don't think I'm speaking only for myself, but when you get bad advice, it's usually evident really quick, like right away. Someone says, hey, you need to build a bridge over that stream. There's a crocodile down there, man, and no one can get rid of him, so build a bridge. Or someone might say, hey, just run across on the rocks real quick. If you do it around noon, he's usually not around anyway. Don't worry about it. Forget about it. You're good. And it starts to become evident which advice you take. The first advice, it takes a while. You cultivate it. You build the bridge. You might even forget in the process that you're doing this because of someone's advice, but you do it. And then what results are yielded from that? Well, safe passage and more opportunities down the road. Whereas if you take the other advice, chances are it's going to be evident that it was bad right now. You fail pretty quick. Bad advice will decorate you with punishment by taking it. And that's a lesson we all have to learn. Kind of like, if someone tells you, hey, it's a good idea to take flying lessons before getting in the plane. That's good advice. Takes a while. Worth it. The results will yield, they speak for themselves. You take bad advice, and the plane will take you all the way to the site of the crash. That's how far we'll get. And I know we need advice in life. This isn't the scary. Everything is bad. We all need it. We need each other. That's why God created fellowship. We share ideas together. You know, when you're in your 20s, you need a car guy, a guy that knows about cars in your life. Give me advice. When you're in your 30s, you need a guy that's a banker. When you're in your 40s, you need a buddy who's a lawyer. When you're in your 50s, you need an advice guy, a doctor. You need to know a doctor, a buddy that's a doctor. When you're in your 60s, you just need someone to give you good advice on where to eat, where the best places to eat are, or how to unload a 20-year-old treadmill. But the point is, in all seriousness, we do need each other, and we need to rely on each other's expertise in these fields, and that's why God makes us different. Now, I talked about I made a reference to ancient people. This is Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu was an ancient Chinese military strategist. He was a master of warfare, whose writings are collected in a book called The Art of War, and it's required reading for all military leaders globally. And it's on a side note, the reason I address Sun Tzu is because he is a man. He was created in God's image. He's got God's fingerprints all over him, as of all of humanity does, that we observe. And that's why you ever met godly people that don't know God yet? They're a really good person. You're like, wow, you're just like a Christian. You just don't know Jesus yet. They're everywhere. And part of you says, you know what? You may not believe in God yet, but it's clear that he believes in you. And you're thinking, they've got that appointment coming. You know that they're going to meet with him. For God uses everyone. Alexander the Great, he uses people for his purpose that we don't understand. And Sun Tzu was no exception to this rule in history and the ancient world. We can learn much about the nature of God by examining the men he creates. And incidentally, regarding warfare, Sun Tzu believed the highest achievement possible was to avoid it altogether. And so it is a noble sense of reasoning. But he deeply believed and taught that the value of discerning who you give your ear to for advice was important, especially when approaching battle. And he shared many philosophies about having multiple advisors. And the same applies to spiritual battle, and that is parallel in all biblical reasoning. In Proverbs 24:6, it says, "For by wise guidance you can wage your war, and in an abundance of wise counselors there is victory and safety." And in chapter 5 of Sun Tzu's writings, he says something very interesting and something that I have found to be true and parallel, once again, to all biblical philosophies regarding the results of following good advice. And he said this, and we know this from being Christians: opportunities multiply as they are seized. So have you ever noticed when you take good godly advice and things start to work out, that better situations start appearing on the horizon? You're like, this was the right thing to do. You're seeing the fruits of following wise counsel. And I can start with something simple like, hey, you should go to Grace Fellowship Church at this Chocolate Fest thing. They're nice people. And I'm not being funny, I'm being serious. That's why we do that kind of stuff. And so people will come, and then they encounter the people here. And then they come back for return visits. And then ultimately, the whole purpose of that was to get to that destined meeting between them and Jesus Christ. Or, if they know Jesus, that destined commitment to them and Jesus. Even if it doesn't continue here, but that it happens. That's the reason we do those things. And it could come from the advice of someone who's been here to them. You should go check it out. When I was able to look back on my life, to look back on and pinpoint where God intervened and started my path towards serving him, I knew that godly advice was the source of that first tap on the shoulder. And I tell people in counseling, or people that are new to their faith or on the fence about God tapping them on the shoulder all the time, I go, when that happens, you better listen, man. You just better listen when he taps you on the shoulder, because that's what this is. And when I see that came to me, I'd come to a crossroads with this opportunity in the music business that would have quickly thrusted me forward from where I was. It would have removed me from my situation and put me in a much bigger one. And I want to be careful about how I talk about this, because this will be on tape, and some of these people are still frosted at me. But this opportunity that I could have taken, that came along, and everyone around me was telling me, "This is it, man. All right, good for you. Go get him. Get out there, go to New York, do this thing. And I started to get concerned, which is really weird. I got concerned, and I went to, at the time, what I would call my spiritual mentor, because coincidentally, at the same time my band was doing its best, my faith was also gaining its deepest roots in Christ. And it was an interesting place to be. And I had a few dozen people cheering me on about this. But I went to him, to one guy, and I said, listen, man, I got this opportunity, and I feel weird about it. He said, why do you feel weird about it? I said, I feel like the devil's rolling out the red carpet for me. I never felt that way before. And I said, it just feels odd. And we had this discussion. And ultimately, I declined the offer. And I didn't do it with class and grace. I did it in a cowardly way. I didn't want people to think I was afraid and turn it down. So I was brash. And I called these people with this project. And I said, if you kick out this drummer, I'll do it. And they said, this is his project. He called you. I said, I don't like him. Get rid of him. Thinking for sure they'd never do that. They kicked him out. Called me a week later and said, all right. I said, wow, you guys did that? It's pretty gutsy. I can't believe you did that. And I said, well, I got the new one picked out. And I said, well, that's something we should talk about. And I go, nope, this is how we're doing it, or we're not doing it at all. Again, thinking they would say, deal's off. They called me back 3 days later, said, fine, we can go with your guy. I thought, boy, you guys are something else. So we went out to New York for 3 days, came back. I called him and said, I'm not interested. And that was not fair, because I ruined that whole situation for all the people involved. I picked it apart knowing I wasn't going to do it. I just kept thinking they would cut the cord. And I didn't want to look like I blew an opportunity. And that wasn't a graceful way to handle it. But I knew no matter what, I wasn't going to do it. And I'm glad I didn't. My friends thought I was an idiot. But here I am now, safe, sound, happy, and serving God. It took a while, but I realized that advice led to better and more godly things in my life. And I'm glad I didn't pursue it, because I'm glad I'm where I am now. I told you some of this sermon was about ancient material, and me and the Bible's what glues it all together. When I was a young guy, I was relentless, aggressive, driven, and full of bravado. I compromised nothing when I was going to go into music. And unfortunately, so was my appetite that way for the world and everything it had to offer me. And that's what scared me. I thought, man, I'm like, I don't know, how old was I at the time? Like, I don't know, 26, 27. I thought, if this happens, then what am I going to turn into? Thank God I followed sound advice instead of those around me. The people cheering me on, go, go, go. I listened to one person who God thankfully put in my path with wise advice. And that's what we're going to talk about, recognizing sound advice versus bad advice. Because there's an amazing example of this in the Bible, of how this folds out. And it's all the same type of reasoning and rationale that I just explained to you from my own personal experience. And surprise, surprise, it's in the Bible. It's all over the Bible, but it's in this story. Now, for some of you who don't know the Old Testament that well, that's okay. You should still be able to get a grip on what I'm talking about, and you'll understand the points. In 1 Kings 12, where King Rehoboam, now that was Solomon's son, he's led astray because he takes bad advice. He takes some really bad advice from the wrong voices that he's given his ear to. Now he takes the throne after Solomon, his father. And Israel, the people of Israel are wiped out. They're beat down. They're tired because Solomon kept trying to build the kingdom up, build, make it better, bigger, stronger, faster. He was just relentless in pursuing this. And the people of Israel came to Rehoboam and they said, listen, will you please just take it down a couple notches on us? I mean, we've been serving Solomon relentlessly. Please, just for the sake of, man, just being good, just give us a break. So he went to two different groups of people for his advice on what to do. He went to his elders first, and these elders also served King Solomon. And he went to the young dudes who were his boys, the ones that he hung around. Want to know what they think about this. So he goes to the elders and says, listen, our people are pretty frosted at me. They think Dad was hard on them, and they think I'm being too hard on them, and they want me to take it down a notch on all this work and give them a break. What do you think we should do? Well, so the advisors told Rehoboam, they said, you know what? You need to lighten their load. You need to listen to them. You need to show these people some compassion. Because when you do that, they're going to remain loyal to you. And that's ultimately what you want at the end of the day. But when he went to his boys, the young dudes he grew up with, the people around him telling him to go for it, they said, man, no, don't do that. Listen, you got to double down on these people. You got to show them who's boss. You got to put them in their place. Do not do that. He rejected the wise counsel of the elders, and he listened to his boys, to the guys around him with the bad advice. And he threatened the people with even harsher conditions than Solomon had put on them. And that's in 1 Kings 12:14. He said, my father disciplined you with whips, but I'll discipline you with scorpions. Don't come to me with this asking for a break stuff. That's bad advice. He listened to his friends. And this decision had a disastrous result, because by ignoring the advice of his elders, which is what a wise leader takes, Israel split. He ignored the advice of the experienced people in exchange for the impulsive counsel of his friends, and he alienated the people. And his actions sparked a rebellion. There was a rebellion, and it led to the division of the kingdom. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel went on their own, left him. He had 2 tribes left to govern, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. That's it. The split marked a turning point in Israel's history, and it weakened both kingdoms. And what does we learn from this story? Well, there's a lot of stuff happened there that happened with me. Fortunately, God tapped me on the shoulder and pointed to the one guy I should listen to. Rehoboam listened to his boys. He listened to because it felt good, instead of thinking about if it was good. And this shows us the consequences of failing to be discerning when we're seeking guidance. His lack of wisdom and choosing who to listen to cost him not just a kingdom, but the turmoil of the whole nation, because it was driven out of self-gain and arrogance and pride. It wasn't driven out of fairness or compassion or the things of God. His friends offered strong, prideful advice. I almost did that. I almost decided, you know what? These guys are letting me control everything. I think I will do this. Thank God I didn't. So this highlights the need to carefully evaluate, listen to me, the motives of the people giving you advice. That is such a big one. The motives and the experience. And we get advice for everything. Mom, I have a baby. How do I handle the upcoming days? Mom, we're going to buy a house. What do we handle the upcoming day? Mom, I'm going to buy a car. What kind of car should I get? Dad, I'm getting this truck. Should I get a Chevy? Should I get a Ford? Hey, we ask people for advice all the time. And on those remedial everyday things, it's not that big of an issue. But deep spiritual matters regarding things of moral content, how we're treating someone or what to do, it matters tremendously. Proverbs 13:20 says, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. That's what Rehoboam learned. That's what I almost learned. Then that sparks another thought. What's my responsibility when giving people advice? People that they think my words carry a lot of weight with them, and I'm aware of that when I talk to them, and I think about that, man. What I say they're gonna remember it. Whether they agree or disagree, they're gonna remember the weight of it. And sometimes I think we all need to think about the power of our words when we give advice, and examine if it's driven by godly motivation. And because a big part of knowing what's godly, I'm telling you, whether you're getting advice or hearing somebody else say it, is humility. And you don't think about sometimes this advice. It affects you. It also not affects the outcome of a situation, but it affects the pattern of how you think. If you start to think that everyone who wrongs you needs busted in the mouth, you're eventually going to do that. So if you allow it to shape the way you think other people's advice, and it's constantly bad advice, you'll eventually be swayed. In chapter 8 of his writing, Sun Tzu, in the Variation of Tactics, said one of the most profound things. It's so simple. He said, the true skill regarding warfare is to know when you can fight and when you can't. Knowing when you can fight and when you can. I knew that I could not fight the temptations of the world if I were put in a situation where people would just do what I say and bring me what I want. And that put me on a path to knowing that only true safety is found in the arms of and service of God. But just as Rehoboam's life was drastically altered by his choice of advisors, we too can go down those same bad roads if we give our ear to the wrong voices. So, and I know this message is going to end with a surprising point, I think. But when we face important decisions, it's a no-brainer that we have to prayerfully seek godly counsel. We always ask for God's guidance to help discern His will. Yes, that sounds like something you would expect from the pulpit because it's true. It's true. We should always seek His will. Surrounding ourselves with people who have God's heart and wisdom keeps us grounded. It prevents us from making, like Rehoboam's boys wanted, impulsive, pride-driven mistakes, destructive ones, if we give our ear to the wrong people. That's why we need fellowship. That's why we need each other. We come to church so you can spend time talking with people who are here for Christ. Not everyone here is perfect, but if you talk to enough people, you can start thinking that way. It starts shaping your way of thinking in a good way. That's one of the benefits of fellowship. And here's the interesting thing. Sometimes the wrong people for advice are our friends. And the very, very wrong people. Sometimes the people who encourage us. And here's the thing. We need encouragement. We do. We need the paraklesis. Come alongside. That's what that word means. To encourage and uplift and edify each other. We need that. And we should listen to it. And when we got people cheerleading us, go, man, go. Yeah, you got this. That's good. That's a good thing. But it's not always the people that are encouraging you that are the best ones to go to for the advice. That's why Coach Ryan Day from the Buckeyes, he will not take my phone calls during a game. I'm sure he deeply appreciates my encouragement. He deeply appreciates it. He still won't take my phone calls. He won't take any of my advice, none of it, even though he should have when they played Oregon. That part's a joke. But he appreciates my encouragement. Is he going to take my calls and my advice? Not on your life. Because he needs both those things. One he needs from me, one he needs from someone else. Who do I give my ear to when life gets cloudy? You can put that second slide up. This is where we start to go, and there it is. So, discerning godly advice from bad advice is essential for making... Normally, I write everything down, and then I don't read it the way I write it. I just speak like I'm talking to you in my living room, but I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I don't leave anything out. Discerning godly advice from bad advice is essential for making wise, spiritually aligned decisions. Now, here's 4 practical ways to recognize godly advice that honors God and aligns with His purpose for our lives. The first one, compare it with Scripture. One of the most reliable ways to discern godly advice is to measure it against the truth found in the Bible. God's Word is our ultimate guide on everything, providing clarity on what is right, good, and true. When we receive advice, we should ask ourselves, if they filter it through the Bible, does it get to pass the litmus test? Is it clean? Psalm 119:105 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." And this verse reminds us that Scripture illuminates our steps, and it helps us see whether the advice aligns with God's truth. Because if the advice we receive contradicts the biblical principles, it's a clear indication that it's not from God. Rehoboam shouldn't have listened to his boys. All he had to think about was the nature of God. I mean, if someone encourages us to engage in dishonest behavior for personal gain, we know that it contradicts the call to honesty and integrity found in, like in Proverbs 12:22. The Lord detests lying lips, but He delights in people who are trustworthy. So by making Scripture the filter, we can identify godly advice and reject the ideas that take us from God. Number 2, this is a big one. This goes from everything I shared, ancient, from Sun Tzu, from me, from Rehoboam. Examine the character and motives of the person giving the advice. That is important. Jesus did this. When people asked Jesus questions, He always examined the motivation within the question when He addressed them. Sometimes he addressed that more specifically. So the character of a person giving advice often reveals its quality. If the individual demonstrates qualities such as humanity, integrity, sincere faith, their advice is more likely to be godly. Which takes us back to Proverbs 13:20. Walk with the wise, become wise. A companion of fools suffers harm. So if someone lives in a way that disregards God's principles, their advice may be influenced by worldly thinking or self-importance. Like if somebody who's drunk tries to tell you how to quit drinking. You know what you got to do? Yeah, not listen to you. Your drunker self. Okay. Number 3 is seek the fruit of the Spirit. This doesn't pop up a lot, but this is important. You get in the fruit of the Spirit, people start to say, that's a whole new sermon. Number 3 is to seek the fruit, not fruits, fruit of the Spirit. They're all just different kind of peaches, part of the same batch. Fruit of the Spirit. Another key to discerning godly advice is to consider if it reflects the fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22 through 23 says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Godly advice will encourage and cultivate all of these characteristics that are relevant to the situation. If advice leads us towards things like peace and kindness and patience, like I was talking about building the bridge, patience is a big part of it. It's more likely to come from God. But if it encourages us towards revenge, and we call it justice or selfishness or impatience, we can discern that it's probably not godly advice. Here's an example, is advice that encourages retaliation. Anything that encourages you to retaliate or to resent, that goes against the Spirit of peace, the Spirit of forgiveness. And Jesus said in Matthew 5:44, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. If he's praying for you, if somebody tells you to get even, that doesn't jive when you put it through the biblical filter. Godly advice will encourage us to walk in the Spirit and grow in these virtues. And the last one, the fourth one, pray for wisdom and wait on confirmation. And I'll explain why this is the most important one. James 1:5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to you. So prayer is a powerful way to seek discernment, and God promises to grant wisdom when we ask sincerely. Now when we ask for godly things in prayer and we believe he's going to give it to us, these are righteous things that we ask for. Taking time to pray about the advice we receive helps us to seek the Holy Spirit's guidance. And also, when you're waiting on confirmation, either through reflection or mentors or just that sense of meditation and inner peace, it allows you to receive reassurance that the advice does align with God's will. And sometimes we feel pressure to make a quick decision, like running across the stream. Just run across the stream, that croc ain't in there, it's noon, don't worry about it. Forget about it. No, that pressure will make you do that thing. That's bad advice. Like I said, the results of bad advice come snarling forth and demand immediate confrontation right now, as soon as you follow it. That's how it works. And that's unfortunate. We need to take time to pray about the advice. By taking time to pray and seek confirmation, that's when we fully understand God's confirmation, His help, our discernment. So I'm going to come to a close here in a second with a kind of a surprising note about everything I just said. And this is an important bullet point. Okay, don't seek advice of others when you don't need to. There are times you do not need the input of other people to make your life's decisions. Your ear should always, always, always go to God first. When you're in dialogue with God, not every decision requires someone else's opinion or someone else's input. Sometimes that can cloud it, and you'll know it. You'll know it when it does. You'll know when it's... Some of the best decisions I ever made were against the will of everyone around me. And sometimes I knew that if I said that, they're going to go, don't do that. So what do? I do it anyway. And I'm not talking about moral things. I'm talking about decisions I think regarding the path of my life. Most of those decisions were in ministry. If I listened to what a lot of people said, I wouldn't be here. I go to God first. I think about it. I wait to see what He's putting in me, in my life, in my heart. When you seek advice, listen for godly sensibilities in the response, because some of us have to talk to somebody. It might be your wife, might be your best friend. When you do that, listen for the things we talk about, the godly sensibilities. Don't give your ear to others with the intention of affirming your own feelings, because a lot of us do that. I feel a certain way, so I want to go and have it validated. If someone does me wrong, I'm not going to keep asking people what I should do until enough people have told me, bust them in the mouth to where I'm satisfied. Because if you go looking hard enough for that, you'll find it. You'll find people. There's no shortage of bad ideas running around out there. I can tell you that. Don't keep asking people for advice until your lust for a decision is right. Many times we know what the godly path is, but we're hoping that some people will affirm our desire for revenge so we can justify acting like an idiot. And that happens in the world. If your spouse cheats on you, or your neighbor calls you a name, we can't go asking our friends what to do. Because half of them are going to say, well, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which is wrong. That whole phrase is used wrong in the Bible. People use it for revenge. It doesn't mean, I'm not going to go into a whole sermon on this, you pluck my eye out, I pluck your eye out. It means the opposite. It's about restoration. If I pluck your eye out, I have to restore the value of that back to you and your life. If you pluck my tooth out, you got to make it right. You got to do something to put this back, to fix it, to make it better. If I burn your shed down, I need to build you a bigger one and fill it. That's the concept of eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. It doesn't mean go around pulling people's eyes out and yanking their teeth out if they did that to you. It's not about revenge. It's about restoration. Anyway, that's another. People do use that all the time. For revenge, they use it for that justification. They go, well, Bible says eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. Really? How about reading the first 2 chapters before and after that before you just hone in on that one line? People do that a lot. Someone does you wrong, yeah, but a lot of friends will tell you that stuff. So the lesson there is to avoid seeking advice from people who are biased. That's why you don't call your mom when you're fighting with your spouse, or you don't. That has bad idea written all over it. You don't ever do that. I don't do, and it's weird because for me and Grace, it's the opposite. Like most people, if you're fighting with your spouse and you call your mom and what's going on? Oh, we're having a fight. Well, my mom would do the opposite. I'd be like, because I've done it. What are you doing? Oh, we just got things. I don't know. And my mom goes, well, what'd you do? I didn't do anything. What do you mean what I do? What'd you say? I didn't say anything. What's got to be me? Well, she's upset. You did something. I go, you know what? We're done here. And that was the end of that conversation. And Grace's mom, this is awesome. If she got her back up in the air at me about something, her mom would say, you need to listen to Drew. Now, this is actually worse because couples fight when your mom takes your side, and then your spouses say, well, of course your mom's going to take your side. But when they do what I said, which is all true, you can ask Grace, I'm not making it up, then it's even worse for the arguing because I could go, even your own mother. And see, that's why you don't ever call mom when you're fighting with your spouse. Leave her out of it. She's just going to make it worse, even though she loves you. So don't bring people who are biased into things in your life and ask for their advice. God's not biased to anything but the truth. And that's it. So we need advice from one another. We need encouragement. We always do. But you don't always have to ask people, and always be careful who you ask. The people you need for encouragement, the people, and your mama, you love your dear mama. Sometimes these are not the people you go to for certain types of advice. Just be discerning, because what we talked about before, Sun Tzu said that matches biblical principles. When you follow godly advice, when you seize an opportunity, more come. And it's important. Sometimes we don't think about all the good advice we should have taken. We just think, well, here I am in life, I'm doing great. And glad I didn't do that. Sometimes we need to be, man, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done that. Don't have to live around in regret, but it should make us be more discerning in the future, because it always comes back to the Bible. That's where we filter everything through. Bible, basic instructions before leaving earth. Everything you want to learn about is right in there. No reason you can't look in there. If you don't have a study Bible, They work tremendously well for looking up very specific things. All right.